This section of Pilgrim's Progress is one of the really challenging parts. There is Demas and his silver mine. There is Bypath Meadow, which when we come across it, our hearts are screaming out, don't take that path. And then there is the giant despair. How many of us have been captured by him? So Christian and Hopeful are walking along and they meet up with Demas. And he calls to them to come to him. And their response is a powerful response. What could be so interesting to see that would turn us out of our way? Can I ask you this? Is your faith so precious to you, that in your walk with Christ so meaningful and valuable, that the things off the path seem dull? That you look around and you think, what could possibly interest me over there? I think about the prodigal son, and the things of the world attracted him more than the wonderful things in the place in which he lived. Do you notice that Demas is not just some character, but Christian makes this comment and you realize he was a former pilgrim? 2 Timothy chapter 4 verses 9 to 10 says this, "Do your best to come to me soon, for Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica." How attractive the world is, and Demas goes after it. There are things that seem to give us what we want in this world, but they never actually do. Satisfaction and hope and everything good is found in Jesus Christ. But loving the world isn't enough for Demas in our story. He's not content just to love the world, but instead he must also try to pull other pilgrims off the path. After passing by, Byans and his friends all fall for Demas's trap. But Christian and Hopeful come across a monument just after that to Lot's wife. And it's amazing in this book how much they look back to the example of the Old Testament for warning and encouragement. Do you ever miss the wonderful truth contained in the stories of the Old Testament? It's easy sometimes to just run to the teaching of Jesus in the Gospels or to the teachings of the apostles, but the historical accounts of what God did in the lives of the people in this world throughout the Old Testament, throughout Genesis and Joshua and Ezra and Job and so on, these are given to us for our instruction. They go on from there and they find a place of great refreshment, which is good considering where they've been through, the valley of the shadow of death, or at least Christian was. And Vanity Fair wasn't that far behind for Christian, and Hopeful came out of that. But as sometimes is the case, the comfort and refreshment of an easy time is followed by a difficult time in life. The path became hard for them to walk. But as I mentioned, our hearts scream out for them at this point not to leave the path. They look over and they see a nice, comfortable way to walk beside them, and we say, no, don't do that, don't do that. And yet, that's exactly what they do. And as we consider walking along the easy road, like they did, they looked over and just a little ways over, it was a comfortable road, walking along the true path. As they consider walking along the easy road beside the path belonging to the Lord, we need to consider something. The statement that they make is, but what if this path should lead us out of the way? Hopeful asked. And Christian says, that is not likely. Look, doesn't it go right next to our present path? The paths that lead us astray often go right alongside the Lord's way, at least for a time. You see, they're over just a little bit. It's just stepping out of God's way just a hair. Consider in your own life how often the paths that ran close to the Lord's way were the paths that led you astray, just off the Lord's way a little bit. When they realized their mistake, Hopeful says he thought it was a problem, but he says, I would have spoken more firmly, but you were older than I. And it reminds me of when Christian met with Worldly Wiseman a number of weeks ago. Worldly Wiseman tells him that Christian should listen to him because he's older than Christian. I don't think the point of this is age, but why do you think this issue comes up again? Then we read this. I thought then that it is easier to go out of the way that we are on than to go back onto it when we are off the way. Isn't that true? It's so much easier to go off the path than to get back on it. And then we come to giant despair. And he and his wife live in Doubting Castle. In terms of this giant, I'm not going to talk about him much in this video. I would really like us to talk more about him over Facebook and in person. But notice a few things. They were on his land, the land of giant despair. Think about that one. Notice as well how part of the process in this dungeon of despair, of Giant Despair's dungeon, it was counsel to take their own lives. In the midst of despair, the thought of suicide comes up. And notice as well Giant Despair's weakness that comes up, the fits that he falls into. I want to point out this matter as well. In the end, it's really important that we notice the name of the key that lets them out of the prison. Now here's some talking points for us, and I really hope that we spend a lot of time chatting about this Giant of Despair. In the dungeon, what do you think that the lack of food and water represents? Why do you think that's an important part of the whole situation? Here's the second question. Why is the giant a giant? Why is he not just a small man? Why is he so big? Here's a third question for us. Why are Giant Despair and his wife named Distrust such a good match? A winning combination for marriage, despair and distrust. Why do they fit together so well? Why is it that this particular key in which Christian has unlocked the door, why is it that that particular key unlocks the door so well and the door swings open so easily when he uses it? I encourage you to think through these questions and enjoy this book as we continue to read it together.